Welcome to Diplomacy and International Relations by Bastian Freiburg. And just a quick note before we dive in, this analysis is generated with AI, and all the content has been carefully verified by Bastian Freiburg. So today we're really trying to get under the hood, understand how societies actually work. We'll be looking at the relationship between, well, civil society and power, drawing heavily on the analysis in the civil sphere. Our mission really is to unpack how things like communication rules and that constant push and pull between big ideals and everyday realities shape things. And this is sort of relevant for understanding international relations, dynamics between nations, and of course, within nations like Denmark, too.
Exactly. It's easy to just focus on governments, right? Formal institutions. But the civil sphere makes a really compelling case that civil society itself, through all its communication channels, media, conversations, social movements, it actually wields a lot of influence.
Okay.
But, and this is key, for democracies to really function, that communicative side needs the support of more formal, regulative institutions, things backed by actual state power.
Right, so it's not just talk. There needs to be structure. Let's dig into that idea of civil power. The book mentions things like voting, political parties. How do they create power, not just reflect it?
Well, it's about how these mechanisms allow individual views to kind of come together, to coalesce. They translate opinions into real effects on how societies run. It's not just about shouting into the void. It's about having ways to genuinely shape policy, hold leaders accountable.
And that brings us to the idea of office.
Yes, exactly. Office. It's presented as more than just a position. It's like a social invention.
A social invention. Okay, so not just a desk and a title. What's the big deal about office, then?
Think of it as a role that's deliberately set up with universal expectations, ethical rules, legal limits. And that framework is so important because it tries to stop people in power, government, business, wherever, from just acting out of self-interest or only helping their own small group.
It's like a built-in check.
Kind of, yeah. An institutionalized way to demand accountability. It's something that's developed over a long time.
Okay, so we might share some basic moral ideas in a society, maybe even internationally, but that doesn't mean we all want the same things. But the book says these shared values are still vital. Why?
Because even if our goals differ, these shared moral threads give us a common language, a framework to even talk to each other. And that's absolutely crucial, especially in diverse places like Denmark, right? For navigating disagreements, keeping some level of social order.
Without it, it's just people talking past each other.
Pretty much. It gets incredibly hard for different groups, even ones with really conflicting agendas, to find any common ground, to understand where the other is coming from.
All right. Now, thinking about how we even decide what's right or wrong, the book points out this tension. We often split things into rational and universal versus particular or irrational. Like good is abstract, bad is tied to specific, maybe strongly held beliefs. But it argues civil society talk isn't abstract at all.
That's a really central point. It suggests civil discourse isn't just floating up in the clouds of theory. It's deeply rooted in concrete things, in stories, in narratives, origin myths. The tales nations tell about themselves.
Like foundational stories.
Exactly. Think about American stories of the ancient Constitution or Puritan heroes, revolutionary figures. Those shape the whole language of liberty. And on the flip side, the language of repression gets shaped by stories too, about troublemakers, loyalists, later maybe immigrant groups seen as threats.
Yeah, I can see how that applies to discussions about Danish history and identity, too. It definitely shapes who feels included, and sometimes, sadly, who doesn't. Then the book brings in Carl Schmitt, his whole friend-enemy thing. He thought that came purely from the state, right?
He did. Schmitt basically said the state, the organized political entity, gets to decide who's the friend and who's the enemy. Full stop. He kind of dismissed all the moral arguments in civil society, called them symbolic wrestlings, weak liberalism.
But the book offers a different take.
Yes, a really important contrast. It suggests that this friend-enemy binary doesn't only come from the state's power struggle. It can also emerge from the moral language, the symbolic lines drawn within civil society itself. And those lines, those moral boundaries, could potentially act as a kind of check on the state, a way to regulate state power based on shared norms.
That gives us a different lens for international relations, then. Not just power politics, but also norms, public discourse.
Precisely. It opens up the idea that maybe international conflict isn't just born in state strategy rooms, but also in the moral language we use every day within our own societies.
That's a big thought, especially thinking about public opinion's role in foreign policy, even here in Denmark. Speaking of public opinion, the book talks about George Gallup and polling. He defended it, saw it as helpful for civil discourse.
Yeah, Gallup argued polling could ground the conversation in factual observations, give a more realistic picture than just listening to the loudest activist groups.
He worried about pressure groups.
He did. He worried about outside pressure, aggressive minorities, maybe distorting the picture of what most people thought. For him, scientific polling could kind of purify public opinion, bridge the gap between ordinary people and their representatives.
Which seems relevant today with social media and all the noise. How do we know what the public really thinks on big issues like international agreements or conflicts?
It's a constant challenge, isn't it?
Yeah.
And understanding that public sentiment, say, what the Danish public feels about a certain international issue, that definitely feeds into the political decision-making.
Okay, and then there's the left-right divide, political parties. The book calls them ideological shifters, using that left-right spectrum to connect everything back to these big civil society narratives, liberation, repression.
Exactly. They use that division to mobilize people, link current events to those deeper stories. And yeah, it often polarizes society. We see that clearly.
We definitely see that polarization in Danish politics.
And Robert McIver, the sociologist mentioned, talked about the party system relying on this alignment of opinion from right to left. Even if the specific issues change, that basic structure, that polarization, is kind of fundamental to how parties work. They tap into those core civil values, take sides, and generate what the book calls civil power.
And that domestic political scene, the way it's divided, inevitably shapes how a country like Denmark acts on the world stage.
Undeniably. A nation's foreign policy doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's deeply influenced by its internal political dynamics.
Let's circle back to office. We said it's a check, with ethical and legal constraints. The idea is to stop power becoming just about self-interest or group interest. The U.S. presidency is an example. How broadly does this apply?
It's meant to embody a more universal idea of authority, something that grew stronger as the civil sphere itself developed. Think about the scrutiny presidents, prime ministers, even CEOs face in democratic societies. That's civil regulation in action.
Holding power accountable.
Yes. The book even uses the American Revolution as an example. The way the colonists talked about King George III framing his actions using the negative language of civil society, calling him arbitrary, tyrannical. It shows the demand for accountability from the top has deep roots. And that principle is fundamental to Danish governance too, of course.
But what about when things break down, when there's injustice, misuse of power? The book talks about civil repair. Law plays a big role here.
A huge role. Law acts as this key mechanism for civil repair. It gives people and groups a way to challenge power imbalances that happen outside the purely political sphere. In families, workplaces, schools, interactions with officials. They can use legal counterpower.
Can you give an example?
Well, historical examples include things like parishioners suing ministers, wives challenging husbands under older laws, or, more recently and significantly, the civil rights movement using the courts to fight racial discrimination. And the legal scholar, Kenji Yoshino, is quoted, saying that when minority groups face prejudice and can't easily build political coalitions, the courts stepping in is actually crucial for democracy. It's about keeping faith with the democratic process, not breaking it.
Okay, but this whole idea of shared civility, it can be twisted, right?
Yeah.
Used to exclude people. The book looks at how nationalism can define civility in a way that casts minorities as outsiders, even threats.
Yeah, this is the really important, often dark side of it. Nationalist ideas can absolutely construct internal minorities as foreign, as dangerous to the nation's security or its culture. John Hyam's concept of nativism, that intense hostility towards an internal minority because they're seen as having foreign ties, captures this perfectly.
And history is full of examples.
Sadly, yes. From how various immigrant groups have been treated in the U.S. and elsewhere, to awful historical cases in Europe, like the Dreyfus Affair in France, or the persecution of Jewish people in Nazi Germany. This exclusionary aspect of national identity has real, often terrible consequences for international relations too, fueling xenophobia and prejudice globally.
But looking at positive forces for change social movements, how do they fit into civil society, according to the book?
Social movements are presented as really vital translators. They take specific problems, specific grievances, and translate them into the broader language, the wider concerns of civil society. They connect particular struggles to universal ideals like justice or equality.
Making a specific issue resonate more broadly.
Exactly. The civil rights movement is the classic example again. They managed to shift public opinion, get regulatory responses from people in office, partly by framing racial domination in terms that resonated with core civil values. And the media was crucial there, wasn't it? Shaping how people saw events like the Montgomery bus boycott or the Selma marches. Definitely. Okay, the final deep dive is into a very specific, complex case, Jewish assimilation. It sounds like it really pulls together these threads of universalism versus particularity.
It really does. The history of Jewish assimilation is explored as a powerful case study of these ongoing tensions.
Hmm.
Often, Jewish identity was constructed from the outside, using that discourse of repression, which made full inclusion difficult.
And there were internal debates, too?
Oh, yes. Big debates within Jewish communities themselves. For instance, between Reform Judaism, which sometimes emphasized adapting to secular society, and Orthodox or conservative viewpoints that might prioritize religious tradition over civil emancipation.
Interesting. And Karl Marx had a take on this.
He did. Marx had this critique suggesting that bourgeois civil society, with its split between public life and private life, actually produces the social category of the Jew, a quite provocative argument. And tragically, anti-Semitism wasn't absent even within some socialist movements, adding another layer of complexity.
But things shifted after World War II.
In many places, yes. The post-war era saw significant shifts, particularly in America. There were conscious efforts at civil repair, using media, popular culture to challenge old stereotypes. Think about changing representations in films and books. The book even mentions Woody Allen's Annie Hall as reflecting a different, more complex stage in the representation of Jewish identity in American society. It's a whole journey showing how hard it can be and how long it can take to integrate diverse groups fully into a national civil sphere.
Wow. Okay, so pulling it all together, this exploration of the civil sphere really paints a picture of, well, just how intricate things are, this constant interplay between civil society, state power, big ideals, and very specific identities.
It's a dynamic process, not static at all.
And understanding these dynamics feels essential, not just for academics, but for anyone interested in how countries like Denmark operate internally and how they engage with the wider world, international relations, global politics, these tensions, these ways of finding resolution through discourse, law, social movements, even the challenges of inclusion. They give us a real toolkit for analyzing conflicts and cooperation globally.
Absolutely. It pushes you to look beyond just the surface level of political events and see the deeper currents of civil society at play.
We really hope this deep dive has given you some food for thought. We definitely encourage you to explore these ideas further. Think about how they connect to current events, international trends, maybe even Danish politics today. Thank you so much for joining us on Diplomacy and International Relations by Bastian Freiburg. If you found this discussion insightful, please do consider following the podcast. And leaving a 5-star rating would be fantastic. It really helps us reach more listeners interested in these topics.